and welcome to this podcast from Geopolitical Futures. I'm Christian Smith. For this episode, we turn our attention to China, where Xi Jinping has been busy intensifying a crackdown on high-ranking officials. But although China's president may seem like a permanent feature on the global stage, a shaky Chinese economy and circling rivals means that his rule is far from secure. So I'm joined today on the podcast by Geopolitical Futures analyst and China expert Victoria Erzeg, who has been writing about this for the website. To discuss what lies behind Xi's purges, what keeps him up at night, and what might happen when Xi leaves office. Vicky, thanks very much for your time. Thanks for coming on the podcast. To many, I suppose, Xi seems like this uncontestable dictator. Remind us, I suppose, of how he got there, of his background and his rise to power.
Hi, Christian. Yes, that's right. Right now he does seem like someone who is very hard to get rid of. But yeah, his ascent was really interesting and quite rocky, I would say. So he was born in a wealthy family, and his father was a prominent figure in the Chinese Communist Party. So that's a great start. But then his father was actually purged during the Cultural Revolution, and young Xi had to weather some hardships during his teenage years. His family was poor for a while, and his career didn't begin at once as a prominent politician or a princeling who would have smooth sailing towards the top, so to say. So he worked different Communist Party positions in different cities, and that was actually very helpful to him. He held positions, for example, in Shanghai and Shenzhen and Fujian as well, and he different political positions. And he very early on began building power bases in those cities. From then on, his ascent was quite smooth, I would say, because he was a very charismatic figure with very clear political ideologies. And also he was a protege, or some say not a protege, but at least close to Hu Jintao, the previous leader of China. So at the end of Hu Jintao's term, it became quite clear that Xi would succeed him. And then on, he became leader, and he quickly consolidated his power, but he also strayed from Hu's ideologies and Hu's way of leading the country. And that is actually one of the main things why the opposition is growing, is intensifying against him.
And we'll definitely be coming on to some of those differences later on in the podcast. I mean, obviously, Vicky, your sort of day-to-day is looking at things in China and seeing, we're trying to figure out what's going on behind the scenes, because, in many ways, well, in every way, the Chinese state tends to try to want people not to know what's going on in their inner politics, least of all foreign states, I suppose. So, as a China watcher, what do you look for when you're trying to understand the inner machinations of the Communist Party there?
Yeah, that's a very good question, actually, because it's very difficult to see what is going on behind closed doors in China, more difficult than it would be with any European country, for example. But there are many clues. For example, absences of a leader. Whether a leader is missing for a longer period of time, that could be an indication of something not being all right. It could, of course, be because of health issues. So we shouldn't say that is impossible. It's also in social media, people cannot share anything. Criticism towards the party or Xi openly in China, but there are ways of circumventing that. So in social media, you can also find clues, not necessarily of people wanting Xi to fall, but people not being completely satisfied with the way the country is being governed right now. Also statements by officials. There could be some criticism hiding in there. Not open criticism, again, but statements could be indicative of something not being all right. Also mentions of the leader and his thought, in our case, the Xi Jinping thought. So that is his main political agenda, or the rules and regulations of governing the country. That is something that generally needs to be mentioned and quoted at any party event. And if that doesn't happen, even if it's like occasional, omitting this agenda or Xi's name or Xi's position as the leader of China, those things could also be indicative of not everything going perfectly in China. And of course, purges. So maybe purges are the biggest and most visible indication of there being some kind of political infighting in the country.
It's ironic, isn't it, sometimes, because you sort of think of purges as a leader exercising their absolute power, but in many ways it can often be the opposite of that. I mean, one quick question about all of those things, I suppose, is when it comes to things like speeches or government statements or social media posts, I suppose you could say if you know what these kind of signs to look for are, then surely people who are allied with Xi knows to look for these signs as well. So how does that work?
Yes, people inside the party can see those signs even better than outsiders like us are able to. So yeah, people definitely feel the opposition and dissatisfied people becoming louder and clearer in their dissatisfaction. And yeah, it's true that Xi's closest allies might be reconsidering their alliances, or they might be thinking about what comes after Xi's current term, because this is his third term, and that is already unprecedented. So we don't need to necessarily think about him falling or being ousted from the top. It's just it could be just them thinking about what comes after Xi's term ends and he retires. So yeah, I would say officials are definitely looking for these signs, and they are reading them very carefully.
I mean, well, speaking of which, let's dive into that a little bit more. I mean, how secure would you say Xi's rule is? I mean, you mentioned absences as an indication sometimes. I mean, talk us through that.
Yeah, he's been missing. He was missing for 2 weeks straight in June, which is unusual. First of all, because he had some obligations, so he should have turned up at political events inside of the country and outside of the country as well. This period, June to July, is a busy political period for China. There are Politburo meetings inside of the country, of course, and there are diplomatic missions every week where the leader has to be present. One of the most important such diplomatic events was the BRICS summit, from which he was also missing. Well, he wasn't missing because he made a statement about not being able to be present there. So that was also an interesting and rare occasion, him sending the premier. It could also that doesn't necessarily mean, again, that he's in trouble, because it could also mean that for China, BRICS is losing some of its importance as a grouping, and Xi chooses to meet with the BRICS leaders he deems the most important, and the ones who don't serve him diplomatically right now, he doesn't need to be meeting with them, and he prefers to stay inside of the country and for example inspect provinces. But choosing to stay inside of the country could again indicate that something is not ideal, and he chooses to stay alert and see what is going on within the Communist Party and in regions of China that would be prone to unrest, for example. So all of this doesn't necessarily mean that Xi is going to be ousted or that the opposition is growing extremely strong, but they are the absences and rumors about his health not being perfectly good. That is another rumor that has been circulating. He's not young, so there could be some truth behind that. And he's been looking exhausted lately. But we shouldn't we shouldn't make any statements judging by his appearance. So that is, I would say that could stay just a rumor. But overall, there have been some strange signs recently that could indicate that Xi's political position is not as firm and strong as it used to be.
I mean, let's talk about probably one of the main issues that he is facing and has been for a long time, which is China's economy. I mean, it's had economic issues for a while, and particularly thanks to the COVID-19 pandemic and China's very strict border measures there. He hasn't really managed to get a handle on things since then, has he?
No, not really. There has been stagnation. That is the way I put it these days, because China's economy is still getting by. But the issues that emerged during COVID or got worse or became visible during COVID are still there. The main ones being the real estate crisis, the high unemployment, mainly the high youth unemployment, the piling local government debt and also national debt. Those are very serious issues. Also, consumer confidence continues to be low despite the government's efforts to boost consumption, because now there is this idea that China should switch to a consumption-based economy. That doesn't seem to be happening. That doesn't seem feasible right now. So those are the main issues, and they've been there since COVID. There's been some marginal improvement, but just marginal and just optics, I would say. So yeah, Xi has not really managed to generate this economic rebound that he promised during the COVID years and following that. So yeah, it doesn't seem to be happening. There's stagnation. China's economy is not crumbling. There is no catastrophe we could talk about, but it's not improving either. And stagnation is also something that China definitely doesn't want to be the case.
And I mean, now let's throw the potentially quite large stone of Donald Trump's trade war into the pool of the Chinese economy, if you'll forgive that terrible metaphor. I mean, how many ripples is that going to cause, or is that causing? How significant is that actually going to be?
Yeah, so without the tariffs, the Chinese economy could survive. There could even be a slow rebound because of the stimulus measures that the government has been introducing since late last year. But with the tariffs, that rebound is not going to happen. So supply chains are restructuring due to these tariffs, and Chinese exports are decreasing. Factory activity has been already cooler. And because of that, there have been mass layoffs in factories all over the country. And where people are not laid off, their salaries are cut in half. So the country is already feeling the effects of the U.S. tariffs. And because of those things, protests have been taking place in different areas of China. And what is interesting about this is that protests are not only taking place in the poorer areas, they are sporadic, but in some coastal provinces, we can also talk about these factory protests by factory workers who have been laid off, or their salaries were not paid or cut significantly. So the economy is already feeling the effects of the tariffs, and society is also feeling the effects of the tariffs. And in my opinion, the societal impact is just as important as the impact on the economy.
Well, I mean, I think for many people, the idea of protests in China, it would be surprising given the fact that, protests, generally speaking, aren't allowed that much there. I mean, they do happen, I understand. And, there's a certain amount of, to what extent they are allowed. But I mean, talk us through how significant the fact that these protests are happening is.
Protests sometimes take place. That is something that exists in China, but they are prone to spreading all over the country. So there is always the risk that they would spread from province to province. That has not happened yet, or at least we have no information on that. But it's significant that we've had protests happening in 4 or 5 provinces just in the past couple of months, 2 or 3 months, which is a high number by Chinese standards, and that's only what we know about, what we have information of. There could be more taking place because the factory layoffs are happening everywhere. So it's more significant than in a China where the economy is doing all right. And as I've said, it could spread. And if it spreads, chaos could erupt. Right now, it's just an indicator of people's general state of mind, uncertainty over the economy, and it's also significant that it's not just the poorer regions, because historically the poorer regions were the ones that suffered first. Those areas, the central China, western and central China, those provinces felt the effects of an economic crisis first. But now it seems like it's happening not everywhere, but not just there. So that demonstrates that the overall state of the Chinese economy is not good.
And I mean, in probably what is a great sort of symbol of the integrated nature of the world economy and global kind of geopolitics and geoeconomics, you've also got the Australian Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, who's in China this week to meet Xi. He's there for a long visit as well, 6 days, I think, which is a long visit for a leader. I mean, talk us through how that all sort of fits together, and then the kind of counter risks for Australia if China's economy continues to do badly.
Yeah, so just like China and just like all the countries of the world, Australia is also taking its chances into account, and it's looking at the potential risks and potential negative effects of the U.S. tariffs, and it is looking at China as another option to boost or to maintain its current levels of economic growth, because Australia also needs to survive, and the US, for Trump, it's not a priority to have all of the US's allies doing amazingly in terms of economy. So Australia is looking at China as another partner, trading partner that it could boost its ties with. The visit is longer and more intense than usual visits by Australia to China, and Australia is maneuvering between China and the US. But if the Chinese economy continues to not do great, or if it continues to get worse due to the US tariffs, then that could make things worse for Australia as well. And also, well, right now the US doesn't really seem to care about Australia visiting China. The US, Trump isn't worried about Australia becoming too closely allied with China, but there could be something in the future, some instance in the future that could upset the US. So that kind of maneuvering is risky in terms of economy, in terms of trade, and also in terms of diplomacy. But yeah, Australia is taking any chance it can get, and right now China can a closer trade relationship between China and Australia can be fruitful for both countries.
And I think it's interesting because I read that the Australian Prime Minister said that 1 in 4 Australian jobs he thinks is reliant, or at least in part thanks to the Chinese economy and Chinese, purchasing of Australia's exports, which really says a lot in terms of how big a partner they already are. And it is just a fascinating nature of the kind of modern geopolitics, if you want to call it that, in terms of how all of this links together. But anyway, I think we could do a whole nother podcast on Australia's relationship with China. But let's have a look at let's go back to Xi and this recent crackdown, these recent purges that he's been carrying out. Talk us through these, Vicky. What are they?
Yeah, purges in China basically mean that an official is either let go, dismissed of the Chinese Communist Party, or following their dismissal, there is a process of political investigation where the official in question is accused of most of the times corruption, because that's like the most generic accusation, and corruption is rampant in China. So that is or breaching party rules, something like that. So there is a generic accusation. There is a process of investigation, and then most of the times officials don't go to jail at the end of this process, but their political careers are usually over.
Interesting. And then I interrupted you there. Sorry. So talk us through in terms of what we've been seeing lately.
Yes. So purges are quite common in China, but these intense purges by Xi, or under Xi's rule, have been happening for years now, but they have been intensifying. So they are called in China tigers and flies, purging tigers and flies, which means top officials and also smaller, less significant party members. But recently, it's mostly been about top officials. So the way these purges have intensified is in terms of the importance of the people who were recently being purged from the Chinese Communist Party. And what is interesting about the most recent purges is that everything is concentrated in the PLA. So people who who were dismissed, who were let go of the party, were somehow linked to the PLA. So military officials, military people, a vice admiral, for example, and also people from the rocket force, which is one of the most important sectors of the PLA. But yeah, the most recent prominent purges, like purges of prominent people, were all from the PLA, which is, I would say, fairly unusual.
And what does that symbolize? What does that represent?
So it could be Xi getting rid of people who he deems dangerous, who he deems as who could jeopardize his political power in some way. So people he's afraid of somehow. But it's interesting that everyone who's been purged recently is known to be or have been close to Xi. Most of them were put in their positions, the positions they held before they were purged, by Xi himself. Some of them, the political careers of some of them were kickstarted by Xi. They were supported all through their ascent by Xi. So it's extremely strange and unusual that such people are purged. The reason for this happening could be that Xi is somehow getting paranoid, and he's afraid of everyone now, or he feels like he can trust no one, and he's purging even people close to him because he thinks they are somehow abandoning him. But there is another explanation that it's not Xi who is conducting these investigations, these processes that end in the purge actually taking place. So all of this is happening in the PLA, and Xi is the one who, in theory, oversees these things. He's not there in person, so there should be someone overseeing that, overseeing these purge processes. And it is rumored that the person in question is Zheng Youxia, who is a prominent person in the PLA. He's vice president of the military commission, the Communist Party's military commission, and it is widely speculated that he's the one orchestrating these purges, and he's known to be linked to the opposition, people not agreeing with the way Xi is leading the country. And so he has somehow, the rumor is that he has somehow taken control over the PLA, and he's getting rid of Xi's allies one by one. And that is why these strange purges are taking place.
And this comes back, I suppose, to what we were talking about earlier in terms of how Xi has differed from his predecessor. Talk us through sort of what these rivals are upset about in terms of in these rival factions.
Yeah, so the main rival faction is also called the Hu Jintao faction. That's an unofficial name. The official name of this faction is the Communist Youth League faction, because it originates from that part of the Communist Party. But these people are upset about the fact that Xi, when he first came to power, he pledged to follow in Hu Jintao's footsteps and lead the country the way Hu did. So during Hu, the Chinese economy was doing extremely well. Hu had very good diplomatic relations with some of the US's allies, and also civil relations with the US as well. So there was no isolation, no hostility. He was much less an aggressive leader than Xi is right now. And so what this opposition faction is unhappy about is the way Xi has, over the years, Xi has strayed from whose path, and he has created this one man way of ruling the country. So he's the most important. During whose years the Chinese Communist Party as an organ was the most important, and who didn't want to be this one person who would be somewhat of a dictator. And these members of this faction regard Xi as a dictator, and also they regard him as a failed dictator due to the things he has, the promises he has failed to keep regarding the country's economic recovery, and also regarding diplomacy. So he has failed to either improve ties with the U.S. or conquer the U.S. or become a global leader and be victorious over the U.S. So people expected one of these things to take place, and she has relations are not good with the U.S., but that doesn't serve China economically, because China needs U.S. investment to be able to improve its economy. But we cannot talk about any kind of victory over the U.S. either, despite the military assertiveness that Xi stands for. So yeah, basically, this faction is upset about Xi having left whose well-known and functional path of governing the country, and he has become this one-man ruler who really just failed to keep most of his promises to his people.
Fascinating. And I mean, I suppose the question on everyone's mind then is, how likely is it for Xi to be pushed out, in the near to mid future? I mean, I suppose, as you said earlier as well, I mean, he is in his 70s, of course. It's often easy to forget that some of the most important world leaders, Donald Trump, Xi, Vladimir Putin, are all in their 70s. So, I mean, that time could come soon for health reasons anyway, of course, as you mentioned earlier. But how likely is it that he could politically be pushed out anytime soon?
That's also a very good question. It's certain that opposition is growing stronger against him. We reading the signs, we can see that but it's interesting that it appears that there is no full understanding between certain subsections of the opposition about how he should be ousted. So some people in the opposition feel like he should just stay until his term ends, and then just retire in peace, and then someone who can potentially lead the country better can succeed him. There are some people who think he should be ousted, but there is no understanding, no agreement on how that should be done, and that works in Xi's favor, because as long as there is infighting or some kind of conflict within the ranks of the opposition faction, it's not going to be easy to form such a strong power base that Xi could be ousted. So it's a tricky question. I would say he's not leaving anytime very soon, and he's not going to resign, that's for sure, because then he would have to admit to at least some of his mistakes and failures, and that's something that he definitely doesn't want to do. So he's also more than likely aware of the opposition growing stronger, and he's the kind of leader who will fight back and use his remaining power to hold on to his position.
I guess, Xi or not, I suppose, in pushed out or not, the question might then be, let's assume that he does leave office in one way or the other. What does a post-Xi China look like?
So I would expect there to be some kind of chaos before China gets a very strong leader, because even if there is a very apt successor, someone who is charismatic and popular and was chosen by the opposition unanimously, he needs to consolidate his power and win over the people of his country. And if there is still some lack of understanding within the opposition, and that's usually the case, there is a lack of complete understanding, complete agreement within all of these political factions in China. There could be some political infighting, people not agreeing on who should be the next leader, or if the one who has been chosen should actually lead the country, because so there could be some political infighting and chaos first. The next leader, what the opposition expect, and probably also the people of China expect of the next leader, is to be less of a one-man dictator type ruler and put the overall rule of the Communist Party first. So we can expect the next leader to do that. And also, this wolf warrior kind of diplomacy has not really worked for Xi and his allies. So we can expect the next leader to be less assertive in the security and military sphere, and more open and more willing to communicate with the US, with the allies of the US, and for the next leader to want to avoid China becoming isolated, and also people and the opposition want a much more consistent economic policy or set of policies. But those are very difficult things to put together, and for that to happen, for the next leader to actually be able to do those things, he will need to consolidate his power first. So I would definitely say that even without Xi, with a new leader, a new successor, it's not going to be easy and smooth for this transition to take place in China. And also, we shouldn't expect the current economic problems to miraculously just improve with a new leader. So if the opposition expects that, I would say that's quite foolish. Yeah, so it's definitely not going to be easy. And first, Xi has to either fall or end his term, and we still have years to go until the end of his current term. So if there is no coup, we should expect things to remain in a sort of stagnation in China, and we should still expect this uncertainty to continue being the norm in China.
And Vicky, just remind us, when is the end of Xi's third term?
2028, so we still have years to go.
Victoria Herzog, thank you very much for coming on the podcast. As always, great to talk to you. You can read all of Vicky's writings on Xi and on China and Chinese geopolitics at geopoliticalfutures.com. But thank you, Vicky, for coming on. Thank you very much out there for listening, and we will be back again soon with another episode from Geopolitical Futures. Bye-bye.
Talking Geopolitics is brought to you by Geopolitical Futures, your source for geopolitical forecasting and analysis.